It will show up.
Okay.
Good morning, and good morning to everybody who is watching us this morning. It is December the 24th for people who celebrate, the Christian traditions of this season. Today is Christmas Eve, and tomorrow is Christmas, so Merry Christmas to everybody. And welcome to the podcast of Japan Expert Insights. Today we're going to talk about something that has been a theme throughout a lot of our podcasts. And we have once again with us Tom Frengos, who is a Canadian living in Japan. And here he teaches, coaches, and writes about how the Japanese philosophies of Wabi Sabi and Ma actually help us and enhance our well being and human potential, of course. So, thank you so very much, Tom, for coming to the podcast this morning and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Maya. Thank you for having me again. I enjoyed our last session, and I look forward to another one today. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I look forward to talking a little bit more about culture, what has been pretty much in my life for a long time. My name is Tom Frengos. I'm Canadian. I was born in Canada, but I also I have a Greek Macedonian background. So as a young child, I was pretty much introduced to the differences in culture and how I had to sort of move in from my Canadian culture, in school to my Macedonian culture, but also the Greek culture. Yeah, that was interesting, but it really got me thinking about culture and why sometimes it can be challenging and why we do it so freely. And then as I got older and I went to South Korea, I became more aware of culture because you're in a non-English speaking country, can't speak the language, everything is different. Yeah, I went through massive culture shock. Well, I'm sure, like many of us would, in a culture where the language is different. And then I moved to Australia, and I still saw some cultural differences. They were more subtle.
Mm.
But what I noticed is that I think when I was in Korea, I was so proud to learn about all the models about culture, Trompenars, Edward Trompenars, Hampton Turner, about who's group oriented, who's not group oriented, who's indirect, who's non indirect. And I thought then, I thought it was so smart, thinking, well, I know something about culture. And
Mm.
then suddenly you get into this point where you're sort of putting people into a box. I didn't really realize that. I did, but I thought it was sort of a bit more permissible because it was through research, but I realized that it was more than that. And then when I moved to Australia, I became more aware of the emerging research in cross-cultural psychology, and there was an article. I can't remember the name, their first name, but Oslin and Bird. It's called Beyond Sophisticated Stereotyping, and it really got me thinking. And what I mean is that going beyond the models and how we are more than models. So, and that pretty much set me on a journey to writing my book about culture. Um, is that learning that culture is more than just the models? Is that we don't always follow them all. Some of us never follow the models.
Right.
Depending, some people are just love being an individual so much that they will do everything just to do it. And that was the name of the book I wrote in Australia called Cultural Chameleons and Tall Poppies, which is being a chameleon, but tall poppies in Australia, and I think in England they use it as to someone who stands out from the norm, not just in the culture, but from the organization. And when I thought about it, yeah, I was a tall poppy. I do like to express my individuality, but knowing when there's that moment to assert your individuality and also to belong, because there is some research that says that we have a need to belong, but also to express a unique self. And that's what this culture is about: is learning to find ways to adapt, but still put your personal spin on it. So yeah, if we can just go to our slides here, I'll just expand on it a bit more.
Right. Yes. Would you? Yes. Let me just.
Okay, cool. Oh, there we go.
Yes.
Oh, a nice shot of Yufuin back in 2022 in the southern part of Kyushu. Okay, so
Yes.
if we can go to the next slide.
Sure.
Okay, so these are pretty much what the podcast is based on. Is my book on cultural chameleons, tall poppies. Now, that book, because it was in us published in Australia, I've decided to sort of take it off the market and then reintroduce it, hopefully by the end of 2026, because I've been getting a lot of questions about it. Is that culture is, how it's more of a journey to becoming someone better, and how culture, Japanese culture, for example, represents an opportunity to learn something different and to grow as an individual. And that's where I came across the concept of Ma, and which I'll share that story about how I sort of struggled with that a little bit, because it was different to what I believed in. Yeah, so if I can just go on to the next slide, Maya. Yeah, so where this comes from is that I believe we all have our own unique cultural self. Because me, I've got a Canadian, a Greek, a Macedonian, living in South Korea, Australia, multiple cultures within me that form my unique cultural self, but not just the national culture, but also the organizational culture, the family culture, the political culture, whether you're and then your occupational culture. If you're a doctor, or if you're a painter, an artist, an advertising exec, or a podcaster,
Right.
we all have multiple different cultures, expectations, sports, what team you support, and your gender. And I put religion in there, and that's interesting. When I interviewed some people in this book, some of them viewed uh, culture and religion as separate, while others viewed it as part of it. So in this case, I've put religion as representing our unique cultural self. So anything you wanted to add when you see this, or
No, I actually wanted to ask you about, you know, you mentioned in the beginning that we are all our unique selves. And of course, to a certain extent, our, let's say, patterns of thinking have been shaped by the cultures we grew up in, and we have been conditioned to think in certain ways. But at the end of the day, our individuality always comes through.
yeah,
And
yes,
yes, and
yes,
so you mentioned that when you went to Australia, you noticed that there were some differences, even though the differences were more subtle. So, what was the very first thing that made you think about these differences, or what is the very first thing you noticed? Do you remember that?
yeah. Well, I'm a fairly direct person, but I noticed that there was more directness in Australia, than I was used to. So that's where we get into the issue of models. The models that we look at things as, as polarities. You're either this extreme position or you're another extreme position, but it wasn't that. It's more of a relative thing. I also know the little concepts like the how Friday was a very big night for socializing and drinking, and how on the weekend people tend to not congregate so much in the cities as they did having drinks at home, but also their view on and it's interesting because what happened is that I always led to believe the Australians were individualistic, like by the scale, but I did see patterns of group-oriented mentality, especially at work, which is important. I think because you want to have a united front, you want to support something, and that's one thing that surprised me, is it was not the individuality tend to be expressed more outside the workplace than within the workplace. Of course, these are just my observation. I'd be curious to see what happens, but this is where I noticed the models start to break down, and that's what the article by Oslin Bird says, is that they all tend to break down the more we dive ourselves into a culture. I'm not saying that we don't express these cultures, but because it's this context, but it's also our individuality, and we are more than just our culture. We got our social self, we've got our work self, we got our individual self, and that's one thing I'll get to is the latter stage of the model I came up with, and why individualism is so important. But again, there are other cultures that are very close knit, that are very tightly knit, that tend to be express a need to conform more than others, whereas
Right.
other cultures tend to, like Canada, Canada, Australia, um, America, the UK, all of these, according to the research, is saying that there is a need to express that individuality a bit more. But you got to be mindful of what this research was. It's all done by hypothetical questions, and not real lived experience. So what can, and this is how it brings me to my point, is that yeah, I can say I'm individual, then suddenly in a situation I find myself adapting, and then this is where we get into issues such as adapters remorse, where there's a surprise, and people surprise us all the time. What we think they will say, what they think we will do by a survey, what they tell us, and what they actually do are very different. And this
There.
is, does that make sense?
Very much so, yes. Yes. It's particularly difficult. I'm sorry because of what you just said, my thoughts went into a very different direction right now, and it's
Okay, please.
into
I like it.
and please allow me to make this, detour. But yes, it's really difficult when you do marketing, right? To expect or to predict what people, your audiences, will actually do, because at the end of the day, we had this recurring theme in our digital marketing classes at school that even when you ask people questions to tell you so that you do some marketing research, right? With the idea to learn about them, they give you answers to those questions. And as you say, some of those questions are hypothetical. They're not based on real life experiences so far. Some of them are, of course.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, most of the answers are really different from what really people do once they're put in those situations.
Yes.
So researchers say that people lie. I don't like the word lie because people just they answer to their best ability to questions they haven't lived through, right? But at the same time, it is exactly what you said, that at the end of the day we get surprised a lot because we expect one thing and other things happen. So people basically act in a way that we don't often anticipate, or we
Exactly.
anticipate but cannot predict.
Perfect example is it's funny when I was bringing up the concept of adapters and work or remorse or what they call cognitive dissonance. Someone used the example in my class. So you're saying that because someone said, yeah, I had a similar experience. I'm a vegetarian. Someone said, I'm a vegetarian. I'm a very proud vegetarian. But one day I went to McDonald's and had a Big Mac, and I felt so guilty about it. And that is, and so it is that this is some, and basically what she did is she justified saying, well, there was nothing else to eat. I had to eat. So this is some of the things that can sometimes justify why we do things for money, for health, which I will talk about. Yeah, talk about. But yeah, I really like it because it really hits home because okay, well, and then person actually that person ended up going again. So we had that question again about why she did that. But in the end, um, I do like that example. It's also relates to buyer's remorse. You like buying a certain car, and then suddenly you just like a I can't remember. I don't want to mention the brand name. So car A, brand A, you buy that when you really believe in buying a brand B, which is maybe more environmentally friendly. And we need to be mindful of what are the pressures or the influences that shape our behavior, such as the people around us, the people, the people we're doing business, our state of mood, or how we've maybe changed over time. And that's why I think a lot of the cultural things that are going out today are missing out on that. There's more than just the models. I love the models. We also do come back to them. They are a reference point, but
Yeah.
we got to let go of the models. And I'll explain a little more what we mean by that.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
wanted to say again that yes, we love the models in the sense that they give us reference points, right? And it's important because they create a structured picture.
Yes.
And we love structure, as in general. When I say we, the human beings and everything, we love
Yeah.
structure. But at the same time, I think it's important to say that generalizing is not what we want to do, you and I here on this podcast, right? Because as you say, each person is individual. And the point that we can go to basically is to say that yes, there are certain patterns that are noticeable in different cultures, but at the same time, in people are very different one by one, and they behave in different ways based on the situation they are
Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
And so that's why we are not trying to generalize or what is the other word? Stereotype, right?
Sophisticated stereotyping. But I'm going to say is that there is some truth to them in a way because they're coming from somewhere. And
Right.
when
Yes.
that sophisticated stereotype, just think of this little table or whatever as the landscape. These are the norms. So, for example, in Japan, I've noticed that there's a strong need for being indirect, not really telling you um, what they want. For example, if I did a presentation and I would not really get a clear answer how they felt. And even when I was teaching, I'd ask students, well, how do you feel about this? And I'd get a lot of resistance, subtle resistance, lots of silence, lots of ma, but that does exist. However, some people express it consistently over, like if I was to ask that on a scale of 1 to 10, how indirect are you? And that person might answer a 10 out of 10, which represents they are more consistent. But then there are others who may answer 8 out of 10 times where they are indirect, where sometimes they will be indirect. And
Right.
what I found is that I used to get a lot of very direct questions from some of the Japanese living in Fukuoka and Tokyo, like about my age, why am I married, all that, why am I not married, or some very personal questions, which surprised me. But maybe over the context of alcohol, some people tend to becoming more direct, or maybe there is the expectations that's well, he's a foreigner, maybe this foreigner was wanted me to be direct. So sometimes there's what we say overshooting the mark, sometimes not reading the cultural air is not as much. So I do see that shift. The more you immerse yourself in culture, the more you will see it. However, there are a lot of consistencies on some cultures, like in Japan. I would find Japan is you'd find a bit more consistency on some panel just because of the pressure to fit in, to follow protocol. Of course, I see them breaking the rules on a more personal level, but
Yeah.
I think even in other cultures, you probably see more of that conformity of that company culture because of the need to belong, to need to fit in, and even in some people, companies make that as part of their KPIs, the need to fit in which for me, that's sometimes a struggle for me because I'm what the Japanese would call derokui. I'm the nail that sticks out, and they have a phrase derokui wa utareru means the nail that sticks out is hammered back in. And I used to say, well, you can keep hammering me down, but I'm going to still keep getting back up. But yeah,
Yeah.
but
No,
and
it's yeah. To the
yeah,
point that you made about the company culture and how some companies make those values into their KPIs. Company I worked previously did exactly that, and it's interesting because that company is a very traditional one, and there
yeah,
was only one foreigner there. That
yeah,
was me, of course, and everybody else was Japanese. And you would expect that they would actually think about others when they worked, right? And they worked on projects and that they would communicate with their colleagues and everything like that. But the fact was that they came from different companies. So that was the
yes,
structure of the organization. And so
yes,
they were seconded or they were shook called, right? They are sent to that organization for 2 or 3 or 4 years. And
mm,
so each one of them came from a different company with a different culture. And eventually, even the Japanese management of that organization, which we worked for, realized that they had to put those, values or the requirements basically to make them KPIs. And
yeah,
so they made them part of the also the evaluation papers of each individuals, the
yeah,
assessment, everything.
wow,
So even in Japan, it happens. And again, maybe in Japan, it is even more, how can I put it, expressed because people here, once they start working for a company, they work, most of them, not everybody, of course, but most of them continue working there
mm,
for quite
yeah,
a while. And they
yes.
become such a great part of the culture of that company that it's really difficult to adjust to anything else later on.
It is. And well, one of the things that you've mentioned is people coming in from different, different countries or different cultures, people who have multiple experiences living across cultures. They bring in those cultures into the organizations. And for some people, it's not a good fit. There is a struggle, and that's what we're going to talk about. So, what I talk about today is not just something about national culture, it is also about organizational culture. Why is it some people struggle because of some of the values? So if we can just go to the next slide. Yeah, so learning to, and this is, I just want to bring this up, learning to talk about cultural influence and how context can influence the culture we express. So, for example, someone from Kanto culture, someone from Tokyo, or versus someone who comes from Kansai, and maybe there might be pressure on someone from Kansai, from Osaka, to speak in the standard Tokyo Japanese dialect for the sake of fitting in. Um, but someone who's very proud of their Osaka identity might continue to express themselves in that dialect. So you get to, one is a conformity or an adaptation, or one is a disengagement from, or a resistance to that culture. Yeah. So if we can go to the next slide, maybe I'll just, yeah, basically, like I said, we're going along sophisticated stereotypes. So I did this a long time ago. So we assume this is how everybody is in that culture. And if we go to the next slide, what this represents is that, we learn to see the differences in people, maybe not consistently over time, but over situations. So, and if we can go to the next slide, what cultural intelligence means, it's a journey. It's a journey to understanding, the culture, the the individual and the context, and constantly changing it. And so what I've talked about in this model is about mapping. When we get into a culture, we map cultures. We make stereotypes we make judgments about what we should do, how we should do, and this is based on our own individual maps, our individuality, our values, what we've grown up to. But then what I do is I get people to move away from that a normal reacting of stereotyping or making negative judgments, especially when we're in culture shock, to slowing down, having more ma, understanding what's really going on, what are these values meaning. So for example, if you're in a conversation and you notice your Japanese colleague is more silent, and you might making some premature assumptions that, oh, maybe they don't like my opinion, maybe they don't like it, maybe or maybe they're thinking it over. And that's where we get into the next stage of understanding, where we learn the models, where we learn the territory, where we learn and then asking people questions like, what was going on through. So understanding the individual. So there we're getting an understanding. And then we get a resisting, where suddenly we start adapting. And for example, the language that we're starting to learn the language. We're all keen on understanding it for the sake of fitting in, but then suddenly we're realizing that it's very difficult for us, and it feels strange, or often doesn't feel natural. So we can actually go backward and start resisting, potentially going back into stereotypes. And a lot of this is based on a number of models. Milton Bennett, he talks about that. But then I've adapted to it to include other things such as remapping, is that eventually learning to remap the culture by expanding what it means, by broadening your thinking. Positive thinking is an important thing. When you start thinking more positively about the culture, you are more open-minded to new ideas. So there is some research on how positive psychology shows that positive emotions can increase empathy and cultural understanding. But that's what we'll talk about today, is internalizing, is where we're starting to take all these new values, the language, and we're now integrated into our identity, into our sense of self. Yeah. But what can make this stage very difficult is why we're doing it. Are we doing it for money, or are we doing it for love because we love doing it?
Yeah.
And then, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
yeah, if you don't mind me adding something. The other day I was watching a video, on YouTube, and it was a video by obviously a very famous YouTuber who interviews people living and working here in Japan or studying in Japan. And the title of the video was "Why I Am Leaving Japan."
Oh, yes.
Yes, it was interesting. But of course, different people have different reasons. As you know, some came here for studying. So their studies, once they're finished with the studies, they're going back to their families and working. And they want to work back home. Others, well, basically, they have been expatriates here. And once their term is over, they're going back, to the headquarters or a different country. But then one answer actually was really striking to me, because it was by a person, made by a person who said, well, I have been here for 3 years, and now they're creating all those, or revamping, or he used a similar expression, changing the immigration laws, and so
Yeah,
they hate foreigners, and that's why they are making it so very difficult for foreigners, non-residents, to buy
apartment.
property, to
Yeah.
buy property. And since I don't speak the language, I'm not going to be able to buy property. I don't have a residence. I have decided to go home. And I was thinking, it's like, it goes without saying, if you want to stay in a country, it's probably helpful to learn at least a little bit of the language, right? Because
Yeah.
of course the language is not enough for you to get integrated. Many people get integrated into the culture even without speaking the language.
Yeah.
So, but the funny thing was that they thought that it was really that easy. Okay, if even if you don't speak the language, if I could buy property and live here, that would be okay. But now, since I cannot, then there is no need to stay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, and I think it exemplifies once again what you just said about the positive mindset, right? Positive and negative mindset, because again, it just demonstrates in different ways.
It does. It does. And I'm very careful to read those type of things just because I find a number of them recently to be a bit more negative, and I prefer not to stay away from it. It's sort of like, yeah, I like to stay away from. I like to try to fill my life with as much positivity as possible. I do have my dark moments, but I like to have more positively in thinking of the culture. That I've been here for 7, 8, for almost 8 years. But yeah, but this is what can also happen is that when that person leaves Japan, depending on how they adapted, did they assimilate? Did they adapt fully? Did they separate themselves from the culture? Did they integrate the culture? Did they marginalize? Like were they identified with no culture? That person may actually have some difficulty repatriating, depending on, and that's what we call transitioning. And what can happen is that some people will feel I'm either Japanese or I'm American or Canadian. Okay, so that's an either or. And what can actually happen? That's potentially is where they feel like a pressure to express being Japanese in the presence of Japanese, or a pressure to conform to the American or Canadian ways when in the presence of Americans. And what can also happen is there's some really interesting research called reverse priming, where when people feel this sense of identity conflict, they actually may do the reverse. So a Japanese with an American may express their Japanese side out of fear that they feel their Japanese identity is being marginalized or is being threatened in the same way. This is what actually happens, and so this has a lot of bearing on why we adapt. But the other one is next stage is we can go back to the next slide, that slide again, just to finish it off.
Yes, yes. Let me get
And
there.
then we'll just pause there before we get into the main meat of this session. Yeah, so integrating, go back, if you can go back to the previous one.
Yes.
Thank you. So we go to integrating, so where you've learned to be at peace with your cultures, where ultimately you want to be a both and, where you are both Japanese and you are both and you're American. So it's a harmonious integration. Some people really can take years to get it, and other people go through what we call marginalization. I'm not keen on that identity. I'm able to say a distancing identity, where you don't feel really attached to either culture, and that can be based on the individual, and that individual tends to pick and choose what parts of the culture make sense to them, that are important to them as an individual. So what the one thing is, Janet Bennett, I believe, she talked about leadership and marginality, and what she says is these people who don't adapt, like completely, who don't feel that allegiance to either one, they have a bit of a perceptual acuity, where they can see things that other people can, who are strongly attached to the culture, the good and bad. Ultimately, that can be a very positive way of adapting, because you can eventually go into a distancing stage where you learn to see that today this situation is not about culture. It's about us as an individual. It's about our work. It's about the society. So, and that's why it's really important. Yeah,
Right. No, that's really important, as you say. And I also wonder how, I, well, basically, many people who have this what's that, identity crisis. Many people go through identity crisis when they have to move between cultures, right?
yeah,
And of course, some of them could have been born in international families, but also people who basically come to work to Japan, or they go to work in any other country that is different from their homeland. And it's interesting because the other day also on LinkedIn, I saw somebody who wrote a post about, well, titled, well, I have lived long enough out of Japan to actually have a perspective. So, and I believe it talks to what you mentioned, that distancing is very important so that we can create a perspective, we can have a perspective and become probably less emotionally involved, right? And judgmental, less judgmental as well.
yeah,
Because, yeah,
yes, yes. And I should say, I never really thought about what you just said about how leaving the country can be a form of distancing. I think it's a great idea. What it's got me thinking is, and I've learned in my new book, which I'm writing about Wabi Sabi, is that sometimes with people who are distancing, or people who have who are neither nor, neither here nor there type of culture, they are not too tied into their identities or their labels. And when we think of being Japanese, we think of actions, verbs, and what we're supposed to do. And sometimes though that identity can confine us and prevent us from doing what we need to do, to adapting to another culture. Whereas I think that this is just a hypothesis, that people who do have that identity, that neither nor identity, once they come to terms with integrating their sense of who they are as an individual, they may have a little bit more, may be able to adapt more easily to other cultures, knowing that just picking and choosing, but learning to, fitting into a role as a leader, that may work. So they can make very good leaders, because they can find a way to connect all the different departments, all the different teams that someone from that one culture cannot, because they're too tied into the culture. There is some emerging research on that, but yeah, this definitely has a lot of bearing about why we adapt for money, why we adapt for other reasons. And now, if you can go to that next slide, I'll just explain a bit more about that. So, yeah, I got this idea about self-determination theory that was done by Richard Ryan and Edward Deci in the U.S. And they talk about why we do things. We want to do things that we can freely, do, that we have a choice, that's also enjoyable and has value to us. Such as, will it help us? Does it actually help our identity? Does it suit my needs, personal needs, my identity? That is the main theory. But if you can go to the next slide, is that, yeah, this is what we're going to talk about today. Hence the term money or love, is that we adapt because of rewards for employment. So we engage in a lot of dialogue saying, I must, I must, I must, I must adapt. So the language, and then, but the problem is, what can happen is, when we adapt for money and rewards, there may be a sense of adapter's remorse, where we feel cognitive dissonance, saying, oh, why the heck did I do that? You might feel angry about that, just like someone who was a vegetarian that actually had a Big Mac. They're saying, I was doing it out of necessity. Um, but what can happen is that they'll feel that guilt, that remorse, or the cognitive dissonance, and it's uncomfortable. And what people do is they try to reduce that discomfort through justifying. I did this because there were no other places to eat, or I did this because I have to adapt, or otherwise I'll get a job, I'll lose my job. And everyone else is this one has a bit more altruistic reasons behind it, but it's still based on other people's needs. Is where I'm adapting for my team, I'm adapting for my friends, I'm adapting to fit in, I'm adapting because my partner would be very proud of me. And so we use things like self-affirmation where I adapt because I'm a good person. I'm a very open-minded person. So this is the inner dialogue that we use, and this is based on the original cross cultural cognitive dissonance by Leon Festinger. I think that's how I pronounce it. But then there was some other article on cultural dissonance, which was done in 2009 by Mertz. But I have the references that people can maybe look up later on. But what can happen is that we'll still feel this dissonance, discomfort, this remorse. Maybe not as extreme, but their studies did show that. But we want to move away from it's got to be about what we need as well. We need to balance the needs of others with the needs of ourselves. So we're looking for things by engaging the culture, aligning to the interests, finding hobbies. So for example, if I'm musically inclined, then I'll seek out the music in Japan. Or if I'm an artist, I'll seek out the arts. So finding something that you can plug into, and that's what research have shown, is to plug into the culture that appeals to you. And for me, it was about the aesthetics, the arts, the mountains that drew my interest, and that's where it started getting me involved in writing about Wabi Sabi and Ma. One thing is, it's not in our identity, it's not part of who we are, but we can connect with it. So we'll have less discomfort, if any discomfort, when doing it, because we know it applies to us. If harmony is your value, maybe you will be more indirect, as opposed to your normal for the sake of harmony. Okay. So what we're doing at that point is we're starting to build some kind of not collateral, some currency, adapting currency, where we are starting to get some momentum. We're adapting to the culture. And then we're getting to the other point where we love and enjoy. And this is where it comes to play, where our identity is that someone will not want to be too indirect because it goes against what their values are. But what I tend to do is to get them to find, it doesn't have to be 100% of the time. It can only be one time on a scale of 1 to 10, or on 10 times. Maybe one time you will be indirect. So what that is you're anchoring that person. You're seeking out, as the Japanese would call a tsukima, a crack in that hardness that we have about the culture. So, and then trying to actually get in there and to adapt it, but maybe to expand on it once you become comfortable with it. And Andrew Malinsky, who wrote Global Dexterity, he talked about putting our personal spin on that culture, when we adapt. So for me, when I adapt, especially for my Japanese language, I found it really difficult to adapt to Japanese language. I was doing it obviously because I thought it would keep me employed. I was doing it for my wife. Then I started showing some interest, especially the kanji, because it had some relevance, to what I like. Because I'm not an artist, but I like to think I have an artistic sense, or I like to express myself artistically, good, however good or bad it may look. But then what I realized when I started loving it, that actually I started speaking more, and I was using more of my own phrases that Japanese would never use, and they would say "hena ne," but I said, no, it's okay. That's my personality. It wasn't offending, but it was just the way I expressed it, and that made it more comfortable. And that's the most important thing. Is I feel that I'm starting to feel like I'm owning the language more and more comfortable speaking it. So I guess that's one way how I went through that experience.
Right. No, it's really interesting because for me also learning Japanese was a struggle. I didn't learn it. I tried to start learning it before coming to Japan, but I couldn't really. I didn't have that much time. And once I came here, the cultural shock was so great that for the first 3 years, even though I went to school twice a week for 3 hours each time, nothing stayed in my head. It was really like I was spinning my wheels and not understanding what had hit me,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And of course, that was the problem. One of the problems was that the girl who helped me start learning Japanese before I came to Japan, she said, "Oh, don't worry, the Japanese, language doesn't have that much grammar." And she was Japanese, and I was like, "What is a language without grammar?" And then I had another person who had studied Japanese, and she said, "Oh, don't worry, they don't have that so many verbs." And I'm like, "What is a
Any
language
verbs?
without verbs?" what are you saying? And then all these things, they were kind of really things that didn't go well. They didn't motivate me to learn
Mm,
the language. And then with the cultural shock on top of that,
yeah.
it was a disaster for the first 3 years. Just, I didn't learn almost anything. But of
Mm,
course, that changed once I went to Sapporo because life got kind of settled there,
mm,
slower. I made many more friends there. And even though all of my friends spoke English, they were Japanese, right?
mm,
And
mm.
so there was still, I found a new motivation to learn the language there, and it helped.
So
But
what was your motivation then?
because I wanted to become able to communicate with them in their language, Japanese, but also I wanted to learn the language so that once I came back from Sapporo, I could find a permanent job, right?
Okay.
And that was, I wanted to work because for me, work is also one of the ways to express myself,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
So,
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, 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 exactly. Because I noticed that you were that using going from a must adapt to a want to, and
yes.
that say a lot is and the fact that you said, yeah, it's about work. Yes, there are some rewards aspects. So, that we will never just give you completely doing it out of love. There are other aspects. It's the full
Mhm.
continuum of for rewards for everyone else for because it's aligned, but also ourselves. So it's more or less making it complete. But yeah, that's very important. And it's and it does resonate the fact that it is resonating with you. Now, when you speak Japanese, if I may ask, how do you feel when speaking Japanese? Or do you feel comfortable with it, or do you feel a bit awkward with it?
No, I feel comfortable. I use it all the time at home. We speak only Japanese at home. I nowadays I use English for work, but until 2 years ago it was Japanese all the way through.
Mm,
Work, home, friends, everything. So
mm.
I have become very comfortable with Japanese, and sometimes I dream in Japanese too.
Oh, wow, wow!
Yeah,
I can't say I can do that.
yeah. It's funny because when I go back home and I get in certain situations with my friends, of course, there we speak our native language, which is Bulgarian.
Mm,
But in certain situations, I just feel so compelled to use the Japanese phrase because we do not have a phrase in Bulgarian for
mm,
exactly that feeling,
mm,
right? So it's really interesting. And of course, that's, I believe, what happens with everybody who has spent a certain amount of time in a different culture and used a different language.
yeah, and it sounds like it sounds like you've found a way to internalize. Well, okay, would I be right in assuming that you have internalized at least the Japanese aspect of the Japanese language in your identity? Would maybe I'm being presumptuous. Would you say that, or are you
Yeah,
close?
basically what happened to me was that when eventually after coming back from Sapporo, I found a permanent job, right?
Mm,
um, I fit so well there. Eventually, it wasn't that easy. It took me a year or so, to fit there and become part of that collective. To the point where my colleagues would come to me and say, "Maya-san, I don't feel that you're a foreigner, even though you look the way you do, right?
mm,
So
mm,
you're just one of us. Thank you for being this or that or whatever, right?"
mm,
But then, well, let's say maybe 12 years into that job, and I already felt that I wanted to regain my other identity. So, because it felt that I had lost something. And
oh,
then it was another process of
mm,
basically rediscovering my old self and regaining my old self. It took a couple of years,
mm,
and this is, you can see what is the result basically of going through the two processes. Well,
mm,
fitting into the local culture and then rediscovering myself, but I still love this culture. I love
mm.
everything about Japan.
Yes,
Even
yeah,
the bad things, because I can see that there are so many things that can be improved and should be improved. But it's like everywhere else, right? It
yeah.
with the positives and the negatives, with the challenges and everything. But I love the way it is. So
Yeah, I like the Japanese phrase "sonomama" as it is.
yes, as it is.
And
Yeah.
I think it sort of goes against our instinct to try to improve things, to try to change things. So I think it's just more about a state of being with Japanese culture rather than trying to do things. And I think if I may ask about your old self, would that be about your Bulgarian side or individual? So what aspect of that old self are you trying to reconcile? Are you revisiting it? What do you?
Oh no, I think that I have been through that process and I'm on the other side. But my other self, the old Bulgarian, is we are more direct at home. We do not hesitate to speak up, to express our opinions.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
what I had lost. Basically, I became more indirect while working with Japanese
Mm,
organizations and in organizations like that. Of course, I wouldn't oppose directly my colleagues or the bosses or everything and so on and so on.
mm.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm thinking about exercise. It reminded me of something somebody told me who I've interviewed for my book, basically about the concept of where we come from. And sometimes we may think that we've lost it, but we've never lost. It's always there. It's
it
always there.
is.
It comes and
Yes,
yeah. But even just I'll even just say just brief when you and I met last week, just talking about you're saying your Bulgarian side. I'm going to be very direct, and so I have a Dutch friend who says the same thing. I'm going to be Dutch and be direct, and there is a sense of pride in being direct, and Dutch equals pride, and that's sometimes what can sometimes stop people from adapting is that is learning not to let go completely, but to learning to stop and just think, maybe I know what does this represent? It's how can I expand who I am? It's and I think someone said, I think maybe Nelson Mandela, maybe it's Nelson Mandela who said we have more space in our heart than we think, or something like that.
maybe. Yeah.
We
But you
can.
know, I can add one thing though that I'm back, to my direct Bulgarian, old Bulgarian personality. But also, I have learned that I usually have to precede, what I say with something. Well, basically, there is something. Well, I'm not saying this to criticize, or I'm not saying this, to find fault, right? It is what it is, but probably we can work on it. So I have learned to use expressions that soften those, opinions of mine.
Yes, yeah, I find that as well. I tend try to find a way to soften it. I do find in Japanese still, even if I do soften it, it still can sometimes be feel threatening to some individuals. Not everybody.
Yeah,
Sometimes I realize that well, it's not about me being direct. I just have to find a way just to go back to my indirect self, and it's not about giving up your identity. It's being it's learning to be a chameleon, not feeling like a chameleon. For me, feeling
indeed. Yes.
that's what I'm saying. But yeah, yeah, I think I don't think there's any need to show the other slides. I think we're okay with where we are. Is there anything you want to add or?
Oh no, I just love the how we trade stories here because again, what you talked about, I believe that everybody who is watching now and will be watching later can, let's say, relate to. Well, at different levels, different times, different situations. Because if you have worked even for two different companies, you don't have to have been in different countries either. But if you have worked for different companies, different organizations, I believe that it's very easy to notice all those differences, right? And to also realize the need to adapt or just leave, because sometimes people don't want to adapt. Once again, we go to the verb don't want or want, right?
Yeah, well,
So,
yeah, you don't want to. I can't or I can't adapt. And now, for in a coaching perspective, the way I would use this type of thing, I'd listen to their stories and saying, okay, so you're saying that you can we call you creating that dissonance, and you can do it many ways. And one could be more direct, saying, so you consider yourself to be quite an individual, or to be quite direct.
mhm.
Yet in this situation, you were not. You were indirect. Pause and let that person absorb it, and then that potentially can create that dissonance. And you can ask, "Oh, why do you do? So why do it? Because I have to." So this is how we can create that dissonance, and then That's because I think in counseling, to identify why they're acting in an opposite way than they believe in. You may do it. There are other ways of approaching it. You may actually create the distance. Hearing their discomfort, hearing that, and then go, why is that? Why do you feel that way? Well, I'm this way. I'm direct, and but it had to be indirect. So there are many ways to approach it.
Yeah.
Approach that
I
issue.
remember also because I grew up in times where we were kind of taught to just deal with the problem the way it is without tiptoeing around it or whatever. I'm not saying this again with any bad feelings or whatever, but I played volleyball. I practiced it, and then my coach, our coach actually of that team I was part of, she always said when we were practicing a new or learning a new technique, and when somebody said, "Well, I cannot do it," and she would say, "I cannot" means I don't want to. So get yourself together and work on it. So
Yeah, well, actually, someone, one of my mentors in the UK, he uses a word yet. So I can't do it yet. And so
yet,
there's one way
right?
of
Yet,
yeah. So
yet,
you're saying that the conclusion to their story isn't done. But yeah, I think yeah, if Maya, if I may, if I can just move on, I just talk about maybe takeaway points. You don't need to show it. I'll just read it from what my thing is.
right?
So
Okay.
I think if there's anything to do, how we address is plug into the culture, be patient with it, find something that appeals to your interests, think context. Sometimes find a context where you actually can express that value and still feel comfortable with it, because we there is context. Context is a big thing. Be positive. Positive emotions. They make you more empathic, and I think it's called the anterior segment of our brain, the frontal part of our brain. When we are more positive, we broaden our perspective. We're more open-minded to many things. Be genuine. Yeah, people will know in Japan whether whether when you're adapting, it's feeling force, and being genuine takes time, by practice, and
Yeah.
finding that sweet spot, and to remember, not all of us will, some of us will adapt easily without incident, without any remorse, whereas not everyone experiences the adapters or remorse or the cognitive dissonance that I've talked about. Yeah, so I've given it a little bit of time for questions, or if
Yeah.
anything to address.
Right. To everybody watching or listening, please, if you have questions or comments on this, just share them in the comment section and I'll read them out. But I also think that if you don't mind me adding, I think that we basically have to be also more mindful of ourselves, right?
Yes.
And more patient as well, because sometimes I told you the story of my coach, volleyball coach, and she said, just, put yourself together and do it. But sometimes, instead of doing that, maybe it's important to once again just stop doing something, or that thing which gives you trouble for a brief period of time.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I have noticed in my case when I was going to exams, university entrance exams, or not even entrance exams, but later on when I was in university. And what worked best for me was studying really hard for a certain period of time, but then I would give myself you know a pause of
mm,
2 days before each exam,
a gap. Yeah.
without without doing any studies, just going out or meeting friends, not thinking about what I had studied.
Mm,
And that worked really well because that pause, that distance actually helped me or helped my brain relax. And it was much
it,
easier to put my thoughts together
it is.
at the
Yeah.
time of the exam.
Yeah, actually, that sort of leads into what I'm going to be talking about in my next book, is the concept of satori, that breakthrough where you've got a conscious problem. I want to have to solve this problem, how to be a better volleyball player. And you're practicing and practicing and whatever, you're studying for something. Eventually, you got to let it go. But what's happening as you're consciously letting it go, your unconscious mind, if it is a very important thing, is still doing something. It is still processing. It's searching the environment for things that will help you get better. Sometimes it could be paying attention to a word someone says that just suddenly it all clicks, and then suddenly it becomes it becomes a bit of a breakthrough where where you consciously are nudged and you have that aha moment or that eureka moment. Same thing happened with Japanese. I stopped studying so hard; it's not working, and just started practicing. So it does give you when you stop consciously thinking of a goal, you give your brain a rest. Your mind can only take so much rest, and one is by sleeping, going out into the woods, which we'll talk about, is how we have these breakthroughs about for example, learning to see things that to stop criticizing things that oh, it's got to be perfect, and now no, I don't care about being perfect today. This is sometimes when we have these breakthroughs by stop thinking about it, by not thinking about it too much. Does anyone have any questions so far, or?
No, not at the moment, not so far.
Yes.
But yes,
Yeah.
yes, we've got quite a few people. We've got Ria Sakurai, Andrew Goins, Timothy Langley, Irina Da Rosa, and we also have a LinkedIn user. I have to go to LinkedIn to see the name. Oh, that is Terence Crawford. Yes, and everybody, yes, thank you for the Merry Christmas and best wishes. Yes, to all of you too. Merry Christmas. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
but it's also funny you say that because it made me remember what you said that that pursuit of perfectionism sometimes could be detrimental, and we really need to get to let go. Back home in Bulgaria, we have a saying about that, and it is like even if you try to actually be perfect in the smallest detail to make it as well as possible and get it really look perfect, then somebody comes and says, don't worry, it is not well, nobody flying in an airplane above our heads can see that detail, so don't worry about it.
I like it. I like it, and I think that actually for language, not worrying about being perfect, because sometimes we expect I must be perfect in the language, got to use it. And I said, no, I'm, I can't do it. I make lots of errors, but as long as I can communicate, and that's the most important thing. If someone
Yes.
corrects me, that will help. Is a very funny story. When I worked on Mount Fuji, it's a very funny story. Somebody was asking me, because I was working in the Yamagoya, and someone was asking me, what ramen do you have? And I made a mistake in the pronunciation. I say, uh, okay, we have I go miso ramen, shiyu ramen, to uh, konkatsu ramen, but it's a it's actually should be
Right.
tonkatsu ramen.
It is
So
ton, but not con.
yeah, well, konkatsu means searching for a wedding a wedding partner.
Yes,
And
yes,
so I thought it was funny, but the one lady, you said, oh, that's funny. So I made a
yeah.
joke about, well, maybe we should actually serve that. We could actually, this Yamagoy could be quite popular if we have the konkatsu ramen. You could have look at
Right,
that.
yes.
So I tried to make a joke about it, but yeah, and I think that's the most important thing, is to not take yourself too seriously. You
Yeah,
try your best, but this is actually what can make it more real for you, where you can love it, where you feel free to make mistakes.
yeah. I remember I made a mistake of a well, similar, let's say, nature, but it was during my first year in Japan, and as I said, nothing really what I studied remained in my head. But I was working part time for an IT company at that time, and so the director of the division, he asked me, "Could you please, you know?" He had a question, and anyway he asked me to tell him about my husband, because in Japanese companies you basically have to provide a lot of personal background.
Yes.
That's what it is. And then my husband was working at that time he was working in the Ministry of Economy, and in Japanese it is Keizai Sangyo Sho, which is Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. But then I made a mistake and I wrote Keizai Zangyosho, which is the Ministry of Overtime Work. And I never realized until the butcher.
Ministry of Overtime. Maybe that's a new department we need to put into play. to forget too much
Yes,
Seinfeld.
but yeah, but it was basically without me intentionally doing that. It was really what it was because, of course, my husband at that point of time, and for all the time he worked for the ministry, he would work overtime until 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning, and then come back home and so on. So
Ministry of
it
overtime.
Yes, of course, I did it without knowing that I made the mistake. But the Bucho, the director of the division, laughed so very hard, and I didn't realize in the beginning why he was laughing. And then he said, "Of course, this means you wrote this is the Ministry of Overtime Work," and I said, "Yeah, that's what it is," and so that's
Oh
how
my
we
God.
make mistakes. Yes,
Yeah, I think
but
that's the most important thing is to just try to do your best, but also not take yourself too seriously and embracing our imperfections. Yeah, if anyone needs to wants to contact me, they can just contact me on Instagram. Yeah, it's called 15 pauses, lowercase. So they can, if they want to see what I'm doing, I'll start posting my new stuff on Wabi Sabi
great.
because I did do a presentation on a paper on Mirror Mirror, what culture am I for a book, and I talked about Wabi Sabi is that learning to stop thinking that we have to be the perfect Japanese or the perfect foreigner, and just to move away from that, just to stop focusing on it because we're always changing. We will never be the complete speaker. Everything is impermanent, so why get too attached to that? So that is my segue into the cultural aspect of Wabi Sabi. Yeah, anyways, yeah, this has been great. This has been great. Yeah, I hope
Yeah.
it has a good Christmas, a good holiday.
Thank you. And if you don't mind, I want to tell people, everybody who is watching us also, please do go and find, Tom on Instagram, but reach out to him on LinkedIn as well. So
Yes.
he is on LinkedIn, and if you're not on Instagram, of course, you can always reach out to him on LinkedIn.
Yes.
And of course, your books, 15 Poses,
Mhm.
and then the new one, the Chameleon and Hyperbeats, right?
Cultural feelings and tall
Belgium,
poppers
yes.
here.
So, is it already out there? Is it published?
No, it's not out there. I'm going to be running workshops based on that book. But right now, I need to make some changes to it. That may take to the end of the year because my book 15 Pauses is going to be translated into Japanese, and that's a bit of a priority. I'm trying to finish my book on Wabi Sabi.
Okay,
So yeah,
great.
hopefully by the end of the year, yeah, by the end of
All right.
2026.
Yes, by the end, well, by next week, basically.
Oh, by the end of 2026, I
Yes.
mean.
All right. Yes, but thank you very much. And yes, so 15 Poses is already out there and you can find it on Amazon. I got it a couple of months ago, actually.
Yeah, I sent it to
And
you.
you're not going, yes, you will not regret getting it. So I do
Thank you.
recommend
Well, thank you.
you getting it. And of course, once again, thank you. If you have been with us so far, let us know that you have watched this podcast. Click like or follow, or maybe share it with friends who might find it interesting, friends that are going through transformation or adaptation,
Mm.
cultural adaptation. So please help us spread the word. And
Thank you.
we have been doing this for almost 5 years now. It's entirely free of charge, of course. And once again, we want to give visibility to our speakers because we believe in their mission and what
Mm.
they do. And just Tom's mission here, it's about helping people
Mm.
move between cultures and different situations and realities. So,
Mm.
thank you very much, Tom, for being with us today, for your time. I'm
Thank you.
very much looking forward, to seeing your next books published
Oh,
and
thank you.
getting them. So, thanks a lot for this. To everybody else, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and
New
we'll see
Year.
you next time.
Cool.